offline, I can just send them this, okay? And I'll go back. But I'm going to go through and I'll kind of show you these completed notes. And you don't have to type all this out. We're going through our chapter. So for example, this is all, none of that's going to be on the test. It's just some background, okay? And we'll kind of go through this bit by bit. So we'll kind of just go slowly through this, okay? So what we're talking about, and if you have your books, I don't know how much room you got where you're sitting or how much room you need. When we're talking about contract law, we're going to hit the high notes. Now, that guy talked about 3 elements. We are going to have 6. 2 of them, well, 3 of them are kind of grouped together. And then the last one is just kind of hopefully makes sense. But when we trying to understand contract law, one of the things I want, just the nature of what a contract is. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Anytime you make a contract, it's when you exchange things of value. Now, that can be seen as a whole variety of things, but that's the nature of contract law. I'm going to mow your lawn. You're going to pay me money. Okay. I'm going into the restaurant. I'm going to buy food. You're going to give me, in return, I'm going to pay you. So things of value. Now, whether or not the value is a ripoff or whatever is kind of up to the people involved. If they don't want to pay, then they don't pay, and then that company goes out of business or whatever. But the nature of a contract is anytime you agree to exchange things. Okay. On your study guide, I got a bunch of things listed under contract, and that's for all these. And again, you can make it however you want. Okay. But that's what I kind of have set up. You don't have to type this all out, but it's kind of the background, first couple paragraphs of our chapter. All right. So when we're trying to understand what's contract law, you are going to be enforcing something, or setting up a contract should be enforceable by law. So if you're building or you're going to buy a house, that's always a great example. When you're buying a house, you have to sign this incredibly long, documented out form. And it goes through all these different types of things, and they basically have a contract set up. You can't sign that and then say, oh, I'm not going to do it anymore. So the contracts need to be enforceable by law. Now, again, we don't always set up everything to be enforceable. We're not trying to do that. I don't walk into Fairway when I go buy a steak or whatever and sign a contract when I walk in. I agree to buy this steak at this price. You just take it up there, they ring it up, and they pay. But you can't just run out of there, so there's rules. And so even though we're not writing and signing contracts to everything, that's the idea, is that contracts will be enforceable by law. Okay. We never want to enter into a contract without understanding what we're doing, what we're talking about. There's probably going to be some times as minors, anyone under the age of 18, where you can get out of contracts. It's hard to get out of contracts when you become the age of majority, over 18. It's not impossible, but it's harder to get out of contracts. Now, a lot of people won't be able to get into contracts when they're minors, with minors. But then, if you're a minor and you agreed to, like I said, like shovel their snow or mow their lawn or something, and they say, yes, we'll do it. You go ahead and shovel or snow blow their lawn, their driveway, and you said you're going to get $20. They agreed to it and they don't pay you. You probably can get to them. All right. You can't be doing a service that they promise. Now, if it's he said, she said, if there's no witnesses, that could get hard. But usually you don't want to get into a contract without legally understanding everything that goes about it. These 3, again, I have slots set in under contract on your sheets. You don't have to write all this out if you don't want to. The basic idea is when we were setting up contracts, they had this equity theory where hopefully whatever you are agreeing to exchange is equitable, that whatever I'm going to sell you that, trade you that horse for this cow or whatever the case may be. Okay. Way back in the day. And it just kind of slowly evolves. Then we start getting in this thing called free will, because some people go, well, it's not equitable. Well, did you freely enter into this contract? Did anyone force you into this contract? Did you not agree to this? And they're like, no, if you entered into the contract under your free will, then that's okay. Okay, no matter as long as you agree to it. Then we went from this equity, is it equitable? What's being traded? What's being bargained together? What's being agreed upon? And then did you enter into this contract free will? And then courts started talking about, did you to agree with this meeting of the minds? If they didn't enter in free will, did they enter in free will prior or whatever? And they just slowly started evolving these things into what would come from fixed elements of contracts. And we get into different theories and that stuff for law school. But these are kind of the background. Again, you don't have to look at it, and it's really basically early pages, parts of the chapter. All right, going through page 106, 107. All right, but basically what we end up with is 6 elements of a contract. All right, we have offer, acceptance, genuine agreement, capacity, consideration, and legality. The person that we just saw that video, and there's thousands of them. I just show some that have cartoon people, whatever. He mentioned offer, acceptance, and consideration. A lot of people will group these 3 elements that I have listed here. They will group these under acceptance, because you can't accept a contract if it's under fraud or undue influence or misrepresentation. So you couldn't do it. The genuine agreement has to be, there is no fraud, there is no economic duress. Capacity, like we kind of talked about with minors. If you just get hit in the head and somebody goes, hey, can I give you a ride home? Yeah, I don't want that car. Can you give me that car? Sure. Well, if they don't know what they're talking about, or if they're drugged or drunk, you can't legally hold them to that contract. So there's capacity and genuine agreement they would go with and say that is all part of acceptance. Consideration is what you're selling and what you're trading. If I'm buying a car, I'm getting a car in return for cash. I might give you cash all at once, or I might give you monthly installments of cash, whatever the case may be. All right, and then he didn't mention legality, but none of this works if none of it's legal. Okay, what our chapters will come through, or in the next couple chapters, excuse me, we will be going through these a little bit more. There's like a chapter on capacity, so we'll go more in depth on these as we continue on. There's an offer and acceptance video I'd like to show you, but I might not be able to find it anymore. Let me see if I lost it over this, me screwing up. Nope. Okay.
After 30 days,
oh, I'm sorry.
I could not believe my before and after picture. I literally rolled back the...
In this video, we will discuss the first element of a contract, the offer. Look for 3 things when identifying an offer. First, it should show an unambiguous intention to enter into a deal with the other party. Second, make sure it's communicated to the other party. Third, make sure it lets the other party know that it has the power to accept the offer and create a deal. If she says yes, there's an agreement. Offers can be spoken. Would you like to buy this used car for $450? That should be an offer. Offers can be written. 5 cars for $5,000? That should be an offer. Even a sign, first lady in a striped shirt can get a car for $18,000. That's an offer. But remember, it has to be unambiguous. If it's ambiguous and vague, it's not an offer. If someone says, I'm thinking of selling something to somebody, that's not specific enough. It's not an offer. The offer also has to be communicated. If someone's just thinking, I'll sell my car to this person right now for $5,000, no question, but it's not communicated, that's not an offer. The offeree should have objective reasons to believe that the offerer intends to enter into a deal. Someone who looks like he's suffering from a head injury offering to sell a sports car for $40, well, no one would objectively believe that this is a serious offer. Likewise, if somebody's obviously joking, a court will not consider it an offer for purposes of forming a contract. So in an offer, we should have one party communicating his willingness to enter into a deal to another party, and the other party should understand, if I accept, we are going to have an agreement. If he
Okay. And so that's kind of where we're sitting at with offer. And that's like the first step of these elements. Okay. And so this whole part, if you got your book open or whatever, we're starting on 108. So that kind of gives you an idea of just a basic background. Again, we're just going to go, even though there's a variety of different ways you can look at a contract, we are going to look at it in a way that has these 6 elements. Because what we'll say is later on, we'll say, how can you get out of a contract if one of these 6 elements is not available or has been broken or is not possible, then there is no contract. So we're going to go with these 6, gives you some good background. And the chart, if you have your book, the chart on page 108 is really good. It summarizes these 6 pretty well. Okay. And so first we want to go through just offer. What's an offer? Proposed by one to intend to agree to a legally binding agreement. Okay. So again, what they're talking about is you're doing something. I'm offering to pay you for these goods that I took out of your store, and I'm going to the checkout counter. I'm offering to pay for these. Okay. The acceptance is the second party's unqualified willingness to go along with the first party's proposal. Okay. And what they mean is there's always these legal theories about a counter offer, and people will say, well, I made a counter offer, and other people will say there's no such thing as a counter offer. There's just an offer, and then if you don't like that offer, the other person makes an offer back to you. Either way, if you make an offer and they accept, they accept without changing that offer, the original offer. So the second party's willingness to go along with the first party's proposal would be what we're talking about with acceptance. You can say they agree to the terms of the deal is a really simple way of doing it. These are kind of official, but I mean, every time you go look at a different course, it might be worded slightly different. But that is the acceptance. And like I said, we'll be talking about how legal acceptances are as we move along. The third element of a contract, genuine agreement there, we first have to make sure that the offer is valid. Okay, we need to make sure that this offer is legit. All right. We don't, there's people in different businesses that will try to commit fraud, that might misrepresent what is being done. You're selling a car by owner. Has this car been damaged? Has the engine been worked on? Whatever the case may be. There could be some people that they don't lie to you, but they misrepresent. They don't tell you the damage that's been done. And we will get, like we said, we'll go over this. This is a chapter. We'll go over what undue influence is. Economic duress is kind of like the old mob movies. You borrow 10, you don't have any money, you can't get a loan from the bank, but you can get one from the neighborhood, and they'll give you $10,000, but they're going to charge you 20% interest, right? That kind of thing. And if you can't pay, then that business is ours. They would put you'd be doing things under duress. Anything where there's fraud, misrepresentation, a lying, a possible just mistake on people's parts, some undue stress, influence, economic duress would break a genuine agreement. But you need to have a genuine agreement. The valid offer and a valid acceptance needs to happen over good terms in order for a contract to happen. You need capacity, which would be the legal ability to enter into a contract. In other words, you have to be of sound mind. You know, certain people, and I'm not trying to be mean, but certain people are unable to enter into contracts without maybe someone else helping them. You know, you start to work with elderly and they might not, you might have somebody else get some conservativeship to help them make decisions. Mentally handicapped might have someone help them enter into some decisions and some contracts. Minors are usually deemed, now again, there's exceptions to all these, but minors are usually deemed to have the unique ability sometimes to get into contracts and sometimes to get out of them. Sometimes you need an adult also to be there. So that's capacity, the ability. You don't have a head injury, you're not drugged, you're not drunk, you're not mentally handicapped, or you have your wits, you're not elderly. And so then you'd be able to enter capacity. You'd have the legal ability to enter into a contract. Consideration exchanges things of value. And that would be money. You know, you go get a haircut, you don't really get anything in return, you get a service. You go to a gym membership, you get a service, exchange for payment, okay? Or sometimes you exchange another service, whatever the case may be. And then all these things in the contract need to be legal, all right? I make a drug deal with one of you guys, I can't, and you guys stiff me on the money, and I give you these drugs. I can't go to the police and go, hey, I gave Connor a bunch of drugs and he didn't pay me. I'm going to jail. You know, that doesn't make any sense. So the thing has to be legal. And occasionally, you'll see articles in the paper about that. Somebody will go to they'll be so messed up, they'll go to the police station complaining about their deal gone bad. Okay, so that is quick and dirty. The 6 elements, you'll need to know those. And future chapters will be based on these, okay? The characteristics of a contract, we're gonna group these. The first one's valid, void, voidable, and unenforceable, okay? I don't know, I'm not following in the book very well. This is on page 110, okay? Basically what you're seeing here is these characteristics of contracts. They're worded, created in ways. These are parts of contracts that lawyers would tend to argue different parts of different if they applied to that situation. So we often group contracts in these 4 groupings: valid, void, voidable, and unenforceable. I have them different colors on here, so when we get to them, you can see them. But we'll go over these 4 first. Valid contract is just what it sounds like. It's just a legal contract. It's valid. They use the terms legally binding, but it's just a valid contract. It meets all 6 elements of a contract. It's rock solid. It's gone through, you know, usually a valid contract is done with using forms and things from previous contracts, okay? A voidable contract is a contract that can or has no legal effect, can be voided, can get out of a contract, would then be a voidable contract. And people are like, well, what's the difference between void and voidable? Void is a contract is missing one of the 6 elements. It's not really a contract. A voidable contract often is like with a minor or with some legal, if you're okay with it, you can do it, but you can get out of it if you want, okay? So valid contracts, legally binding. A voidable contract has no legal effect. It's missing one of the 6 elements or more. A voidable contract is when somebody can cancel it for some legal reason, but chooses not to. And we'll go through this. Again, we're giving you the high notes here. We'll go through what these look like later. An unenforceable contract is one that courts generally are going to say doesn't work for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons might be the timeline is over. All right, I offer to sell you something, and in return, you got to pay me, but I can't. This isn't open for the rest of my life. You know, or you go back to reasonable person tests, things like that. So these are 4 characteristics of contracts. If a contract is valid, it's legally binding. Void, it's not. really a contract at all because it's missing one or more of the elements. I should have put one or more of the elements there. Avoidable contract means you can get out of it if you want to for some reason. Usually it's minors getting into a contract, and then unenforceable is one the court will not hold up. If you took it to court, it would be an unenforceable contract, and then you guys hopefully would be able to make a decision together. Okay. Other parts, express contract. Express is a contract statement in words, may be either oral or written. Implied comes from actions of the parties. I got another video I want to show you really quick, if I can find it. I just had it again, sorry.
Capriati's has all the fresh oven.
That. I saved it. Where is it? Express and implied, sorry.
In this video, we'll discuss express and implied contracts. It's relatively easy to identify express contracts and express contractual terms. These are the terms that the parties expressly agree upon, whether in an oral contract or in a written contract. These are the terms that the parties explicitly say they are agreeing upon. Just looking at the portion of this contract, we can say, okay, it's an express contractual term that Patty pays $100 in advance. It's also an express contractual term that this project has to be completed by Monday. While express contractual terms should be fairly obvious, you'll also need to recognize implied contracts. There are two types of implied contracts that we're going to look at. The first is implied in fact contracts, and then we'll look at something called implied in law contracts. Implied in fact contracts, or implied in fact contractual terms, are different from express contracts. For implied in fact contracts, we don't have express verbal or written terms, but it's a contract, and we understand the terms of the contract based on the party's conduct and the circumstances. When people go to a restaurant and order food, nobody signs a contract, but there's an implied agreement to pay. Ordering food from the waiter is conduct that shows an implied agreement to pay for the food. You'll also need to recognize implied in law contracts, and these are actually not contracts. You might also hear implied in law contracts referred to as quasi-contracts. Courts create quasi-contracts to impose an obligation on one party to compensate another. Look for a situation where one party gives a benefit to another party, and it would be unfair if a court didn't require some sort of compensation. Let's say Debbie's in some distress at a restaurant, and Dr. Paul runs over to help, and he saves the day. A court might find that Debbie is obligated to compensate Dr. Paul for his services. Now, obviously, there was no contract here. There was no promise made by anybody. But a court might find that because of the benefit Dr. Paul provided to Debbie, it would be unfair if he did not receive some sort of fair compensation. To review, you'll recognize express contractual terms as the terms that the parties explicitly agreed upon. It'll be right there in a written agreement, or it's the terms that the parties verbally agreed on. Implied in fact contractual terms are terms that we understand to exist based on the party's conduct, based on the circumstances. Think about the last time you got a haircut or went out to eat. There was an implied agreement to pay for the service, to pay for the food. Quasi-contracts, or implied in law contracts, are not contracts at all, but a court might impose an obligation on one party to compensate the other party in return for a benefit that the party has received and retained.
Okay.
If you'd like to discuss contract law or any other matter related.
One of the things I wanted to show you then is when we get to expressed and implied, expressed is either orally communicated or written, like written down contract like you saw there. Okay, implied comes from if you do, you know, it's implied that I'm going to pay for the restaurant, I'm going to pay for the haircut, like he said. You don't have to worry about quasi contracts. That doctor thing that you can't get sued for that. Now, it's a nice gesture, and there's better examples of quasi contracts. Again, this is kind of, they're trying to keep it light. That would be not one that would be super serious. So don't worry about what do you mean if you do something nice, you have to pay them. No, you don't. Okay. Is it nice? Yeah. I mean, you might get them something or do something, but that's all right. But these are always grouped together. You will see expressed and implied. You would see valid, void, voidable, and enforceable. Okay, so expressed is either orally or written communicated from one person to the other, and implied comes from the actions of these people. And in the last video, we got bilateral and unilateral, oral and written. I think you understand an oral contract when it comes from word of mouth from one person to the other. For two or more people are speaking. With a written contract, it's always a proof that it's happening. Many contracts actually have to be in writing. Okay, but I wanted to show the last one with the implied, and make sure I'm doing the right one. The bilateral and unilateral contract. And this is, I'll try not to keep you much longer. It's only about 2 minutes, give or take. These are all pretty short.
In this video, we're going to discuss and distinguish bilateral and unilateral contracts. So let's start with a bilateral contract. In a bilateral contract, the offeror is going to make a promise, and she's going to get a promise in return from the offeree. So let's say we have Patty and David outside of Patty's house, and Patty makes a promise. She promises David that she'll pay him $100. But in return for her promise, she wants David to make a promise. So David promises in return that he'll paint Patty's fence. Good job, Patty and David. You now have a bilateral contract. David's promised to paint a fence and Patty's promised to pay money. So in our bilateral contract, we have parties making promises to each other. But let's say instead of 2 promises, we only have 1 promise. Patty says, if you paint the fence, I promise to pay you $100. So at this point, Patty's made a promise to pay. But David has promised nothing. And actually, Patty doesn't even want a promise from David. David accepts the offer by performing, by painting the fence. He's entitled to his money once he performs. Rewards or contests are usually unilateral contracts. For example, let's say Patty puts up a sign saying, "Lost dog, $500 reward," and David sees the sign. Now there's only 1 promise here. Patty's promised $500 to whoever can find her dog. So let's say David performs. He finds the dog. Now Patty has to keep her promise and pay the reward. So in a bilateral contract, there'll be at least 2 promises. The parties are making promises to each other. So one party will say, I promise to pay you $100. The other party promises to paint the fence. Bilateral contract. In a unilateral contract, though, the offerer is not looking for a promise in return. Performance is acceptance of the offer. If you'd like to discuss bilateral and unilateral
Okay. So that was kind of just giving you, again, showing you a little bit about the bilateral, unilateral. If you say something, one person's promise is different than 2 people promising. And again, a lot of this seems probably like we're splitting hairs, but that's okay. For right now, we just want you to get them understanding the groupings of different characteristics of a contract. It can either be oral or written, bilateral, unilateral, express or implied. If it's valid, things are good to go. It's voidable, then you got to get rid of it. If it's void, you got to get rid of it. If it's voidable, you can, if you want to, get rid of it. If it's unenforceable, you got to change it, make sure it looks, different somehow so that you can get it to work. Okay, so that's 5.1, real quick in a nutshell. Not much time. Sorry it took so long. On our, I guess I shouldn't have quit that. On our page, there are some questions for 5.1. And if you did the notes, you probably just copy and paste them in there. With the 6 elements of a contract, going from offer to legal, and then the 4 main groupings describing each of these 10 items. You want to define each of those. Hopefully you were able to, that would be these 10 that we just went through. And these are the 4 groupings: valid, void, voidable, unenforceable, express and implied, bilateral, lateral, oral, and written. And we'll give you some points for doing that. You got 20 minutes. Sorry, I wanted to do that. I should have done it quicker. But you got time now. This isn't due. I won't grade this until, I would guess we would take chapter 5 test sometime like next Friday. Like we'll have class Friday, then we'll have class Monday, and then we'll have class Thursday, either probably a week from tomorrow. So then we'll have time to maybe do some study guide work or quiz or something, and then we'll take the test on Friday. So it won't necessarily be due till Friday. All right. But I appreciate you guys' time. I do want to tell you thank you. You guys, our attendance has been awesome. I know it's probably not that fun. I know that us adults bitch about being on computers for long periods of time. So I do appreciate your time. Sorry I went over. That wasn't my intent. I'm trying to be aware of how much it sucks to be in the Zoom meeting. So I do appreciate it. Thanks a lot, everybody. Like I said, if you got time, take a look at that. Otherwise, you can go for the day. I hope you have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow. And I can stay on if you have any questions. I'll be on. So holler at me if you need. See ya.
See ya.
Jaden, I did get that. I'll grade it real quick now. Sorry about that.
Okay, sweet.